Scary telling.
I had always wanted to be a father, but when my wife Dina became pregnant with our first child, I found myself consumed with worry. Dina's pregnancy had been difficult, and her daughter, Daria, was born prematurely, spending the first few weeks of her life in the neonatal intensive care unit. But we got through it. Daria grew stronger, and we settled into our roles as new parents. We had always planned to stay in Nairobi for only 2 years, the length of Dina's contract, but when it was renewed, we found ourselves embracing our life in Kenya. We had made good friends, secured a place for Daria in the American school, and welcomed a new addition to our family, our son Charlie. Charlie's arrival was not without complications. Dina's life was endangered during his birth, and we were grateful for the excellent medical care she received. Charlie was born small and underweight, but he was healthy, and we were overjoyed to have him in our lives. However, the first few months were challenging, with many sleepless nights and emergency trips to the hospital. Despite the difficulties, we loved being parents to both Daria and Charlie. We found a well-regarded babysitter so we could have some time to ourselves, and one evening, we went out for our anniversary dinner with friends. As we enjoyed our meal and conversation, we felt a sense of contentment and gratitude for our life in Nairobi. But that feeling was short-lived. When we returned home, we found our world turned upside down. Charlie was gone, and our babysitter was nowhere to be found. My heart was pounding in my chest as I searched every room of the house, hoping that he was simply hidden somewhere. But there was no sign of him. Dina was on the phone with the police, her voice shaking as she tried to describe the situation. Tears streamed down her face as she hung up and told me that they would be on their way soon. I felt numb, like I was watching everything from a distance. This couldn't be happening to us. We waited in the living room, staring at the empty crib where Charlie should have been sleeping. Minutes felt like hours, and my mind was racing with thoughts of where he could be, who could have taken him, and why. When the police arrived, they asked us a barrage of questions. I struggled to keep my thoughts straight, my mind clouded with fear and panic. As the hours passed, it became clear that Charlie was not going to be found that night. We were left to spend the night, alone, with our fears and anxieties. I remember sitting on the couch with Dina, holding her hand, and feeling the weight of the silence around us. It was as if the walls of our home had closed in, suffocating us with their emptiness. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall, a reminder of the time that was slipping away from us. That night, we didn't sleep. We stayed up, waiting for any news about our son, praying that he was safe and that we would find him soon. But as the night wore on, our hopes began to fade, and the reality of our situation set in. Our fragile little life, which had seemed so perfect just hours before, had been shattered, and we were left to pick up the pieces. The morning after Charlie went missing, the house felt eerily quiet. The silence was oppressive, as if the very air had been sucked out of the room. My wife and I were exhausted from the previous night's anxiety, and we spent the morning in a daze, unable to fully comprehend what had happened. I spent the day searching for any clue that might lead to Charlie's whereabouts. I canvassed the neighborhood, looking for anyone who might have seen something. I spoke with the police again, who assured me that they were doing everything they could to find our son. As the day wore on, the knot in my stomach grew tighter. I couldn't bear the thought of something happening to my son. I felt helpless, as though I should be doing more to find him. I knew that I had to stay strong for Dina, who was already dealing with so much, but it was difficult. That night, Dina and I sat in the living room, exhausted and defeated. We had searched every inch of the house, every corner of the neighborhood. We had made countless phone calls and spoken with everyone we could think of. But Charlie was still missing. I couldn't help but think about the worst-case scenario. What if we never found him? What if he had been taken by someone who didn't want him found? The thought was too much to bear. I didn't know how I could go on without my son. As the days turned into weeks, our lives revolved around the search for Charlie. We went to the police station every day, hoping for any news. We spoke with neighbors and put up posters. We contacted the media, hoping that someone would see his picture and recognize him. But despite our efforts, we were no closer to finding Charlie. The days dragged on, each one feeling longer than the last. I struggled to maintain a sense of normalcy, going to work and trying to keep up with my responsibilities, but my mind was always on my son. At night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the city outside. I would try to imagine where Charlie could be, but my mind always came back to the same place, the crib in his room, empty and waiting for him. Weeks turned into months, and still, there was no sign of Charlie. The police told us that they were doing everything they could, but their assurances did little to ease our fears. We were left with nothing but our grief and our unanswered questions. It was during this time that I began to question everything. Why had we ever come to Nairobi? What kind of life was this, where our child could be taken from us in an instant? I felt angry and bitter, as if the world had betrayed us. But despite my anger, I never lost hope. Deep down, I knew that we would find Charlie. I didn't know when or how, but I believed that he was out there, waiting for us to find him. And so, we continued to search, hoping against hope that we would one day be reunited with our son. Months passed, and our search for Charlie seemed to be going nowhere. We had no leads, no clues, and no idea where he could be. It was as if he had disappeared off the face of the earth. Then, one day, a farmer discovered something in a nearby field. It was a small body, decomposed beyond recognition. Our hearts stopped as we heard the news. We knew, deep down, that it was Charlie. The police confirmed our worst fears. Our little boy had been found, discarded like a piece of trash in a field. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The grief was overwhelming, and I struggled to breathe. It was as if the world had turned upside down. The investigation began in earnest. The police collected evidence from the scene, hoping to find any clue that might lead to the person responsible for our son's death. We were interviewed again, this time with a different kind of urgency. Every detail of our lives was scrutinized, and it felt like we were being treated like suspects. It was during these interviews that the police brought up something that had been nagging at me for months. They asked about Daria's behavior leading up to Charlie's disappearance. It had been odd, to say the least. She had been distant, withdrawn, and uncharacteristically quiet. I had chalked it up to the stress of the situation, but now I wondered if there was more to it. The police seemed to think so. They questioned Daria, but she was too young to fully understand what was happening. We watched as she played with her toys, blissfully unaware of the tragedy that had befallen our family. As the investigation continued, the police uncovered some disturbing evidence. The babysitter we had hired had a history of mental illness and had attempted suicide in the past. They found drawings in Daria's room of dead animals and a doll that resembled Charlie. It was as if everything was pointing to the unthinkable, that our daughter had something to do with our son's death. It was too much to bear. I felt like my world was crumbling around me. How could this happen to our family? How could we have missed the signs? The police told us that Daria needed to be questioned again, this time in a more formal setting. They warned us that it would be difficult and that we might not like what we heard. But we knew that we had to face the truth. We had to know what had happened to our son. So, we sat down with Daria and the police, and we listened as our daughter confessed to suffocating Charlie with a pillow. The room spun around me, and I felt like I was going to be sick. How could this be happening? How could our sweet little girl be capable of such a thing? But as the days passed, and we began to process what had happened, we started to understand. Daria was struggling with the arrival of her little brother and the changes that had come with it. She didn't fully understand what she was doing, but in her own way, she was trying to protect her place in the family. It was a tragic situation, and one that would haunt us for the rest of our lives. But we knew that we had to stay strong for our daughter, who needed us now more than ever. We had lost one child, but we still had one left, and we would do everything in our power to make sure that she was okay. The days and weeks that followed were a blur. We were consumed by grief and guilt, trying to come to terms with what had happened. Our daughter had killed our son, and we didn't know how to move forward. We spoke with therapists and counselors, trying to find a way to make sense of the tragedy. It was a long and difficult process, but we slowly started to heal. We learned to forgive ourselves and each other, and to understand that what had happened was not our fault. But it wasn't easy. There were times when the grief was too much to bear, when we would break down in tears, unable to comprehend the loss of our son. We struggled to keep up with our day-to-day lives, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy for our daughter's sake. We decided to stay in Nairobi to try and make a life for ourselves here. It was a difficult decision, but we felt like we had to make the best of the situation. We started volunteering at a local children's hospital, hoping to do some good in our community. It was a small step, but it felt like a way to honor Charlie's memory. As the months passed, we started to see glimmers of hope. Daria began to come out of her shell, making new friends and becoming more comfortable with the idea of being a big sister. We talked about Charlie often, telling stories about him and remembering the brief time we had with him. It was still painful, but we were starting to move forward. We knew that we would never forget what had happened, but we also knew that we couldn't let it define us. And then, one day, something unexpected happened. Daria came home from school with a drawing she had made. It was a picture of her and Charlie, holding hands and smiling. It was the first time she had mentioned him since his death, and it took our breath away. We knew then that we were going to be okay. We would never forget our son, but we would also never give up on our daughter. We would do everything in our power to help her heal and to make sure that she knew that she was loved. It was a long road, and one that we would travel for the rest of our lives. But we knew that we were not alone, that there were others out there who had experienced the same kind of loss. And together, we would find a way to move forward, to honor the memory of those we had lost, and to create a new future for ourselves. Years had passed since Charlie's death, and our family had come a long way. Daria had grown up into a kind and compassionate young woman, and we were proud of the person she had become. We had found a new normal, one that was shaped by the loss of our son, but also by the love that we shared as a family. We had stayed in Nairobi, and it had become our home. We had made friends and built a life here, and we were grateful for the opportunities that it had given us. But even as we had moved on, we never forgot Charlie. We spoke of him often, and we kept his memory alive in our hearts. We knew that he would always be a part of our family, even if he wasn't physically with us. And then, one day, something miraculous happened. Daria came to us with the news that she was pregnant. We were overjoyed at the thought of becoming grandparents, but we also felt a twinge of sadness. We knew that Charlie would never meet his niece or nephew, and it was a bitter reminder of the loss that we had suffered. But as Daria's pregnancy progressed, we started to see signs of Charlie everywhere. It was as if he was watching over us, guiding us as we welcomed a new life into the world. We felt his presence in the smallest of things, in the way the sunlight fell through the window or in the sound of the birds outside. And when Daria gave birth, we knew that Charlie was there with us. It was a bittersweet moment, but it was also a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. We had lost one child, but we had gained another, and it was a reminder that life goes on even in the face of tragedy. As we held our grandchild in our arms, we felt a sense of hope and renewal. We knew that our family would never be the same, but we also knew that we had the strength and love to overcome any obstacle. And so, we looked to the future with optimism, knowing that whatever came our way, we would face it together. We had survived the unthinkable, and we knew that we could overcome anything as long as we had each other.